so far 10% of college football programs have gotten the college football playoff. And if they had 12 teams for the last 8 years, it would be like 33%. And he threw up teams. Western Michigan would have been. Arizona one year, I think that was the year Rich Rod got to the Pac-12 championship, would have been a Pac. I don't think the conference expansion, the college football expansion solves fucking anything. Because if you want to make the argument, well, look at the NFL, 14 teams get in. Well, the difference is yeah, Tampa Bay kills Philly, right? 2-7. Well, the Niners at a 3-6 or 2, whatever it was, I guess it was the second round. Well, one, they're an underdog against the Cowboys, who have multiple. It was 12-win team, they were a 10-win team. Niners beat them. That's not as crazy of an upset. That could happen, right? A 4-5 type thing in college football. The difference, though, is once the Niners played the Packers, they're the 1 seed, heavy favorites, the equivalent of like Alabama playing Cincinnati or Georgia playing Michigan. The Niners didn't just upset them. Like they were just, I mean, they were equals. That has not been the case in college football playoff. And right now, clearly, Alabama and Georgia would wipe the floor with everybody. And consistently, that's kind of been happening. So you can add these teams, which I'm fine with. I want to watch these games. But we have to be prepared. There are going to be a lot of shitty games. There just are. I mean, the separation at the top is not even close. And I think Georgia and Oregon showed that is like everyone – I don't follow recruiting that closely. You probably follow it closer than I do. But I do understand, like, once the guy gets there, like, the hype on a guy, I follow it then. And there's been so much, it's so loud on Mario's hype. And it was clear. Like, you just look at the rivals' ratings. When you look at, like, draft prospects, Mario was fucking going top 10, top 10, top 10. Well, one thing the Georgia-Oregon game showed is, like, and I was told this back when I was in the NFL and I worked with Alabama people. They don't recruit people, they choose people. Now, you could argue now with the NIL a little different, like Jimbo's got in there and LSU and Georgia. Like, of course, like there's a guy that picks between like 2 or 3 schools. But for the most part, who Alabama and Georgia, and I'd even throw kind of Ohio State in there, who they want, they get. Like who they really, really want. Now, again, there are a couple guys that the difference between like the top 3, 4 recruiting classes now, I think in like 7, 8, 9, is a pretty, because Harbaugh recruits really well. And we've seen him a couple times get in these games where it's like, I thought you have sweet players and they have sweet players, and the gap looks so wide. And I don't think that's going to change, because it's not like I can get Cam Rising, you can get Anthony Richardson. And like we just said, Anthony Richardson's a little bit better. But the gap, I mean, it's fine. You can win with those level quarterbacks either side. But it's just like the talent at the lines. Like that to me, I watched a lot of SEC football in Nashville. They are way more physical, and they're just way faster. And then Phil Savage always told me that about Clemson. And when Jimbo was at Florida State, they recruit an SEC player and they play an ACC schedule. Well, you watch Clemson last night on defense, what did it look like? They have NFL guys everywhere. And Utah is like, it's why I respect them. Like they're easily the best program out west. Now, Lincoln will probably have them rolling in a couple of years. But like right now, Utah is on a completely different level even than Oregon. And to me, that has probably a lot to do with like developmental stuff. But like if you would have put Utah on the same field as Georgia at Oregon, I think it would have been closer. They just better coached, more experience, but it still would have been a pretty wide gap, right?
If you would put Utah on the field with Oregon?
With Georgia.
Oh, with Georgia, yeah.
So maybe the final score is 38-12.
Not all 5 stars are created equal. Not all 4 stars are created
And that's
equal.
a bad example because Utah's not recruiting that kid. But like I think USC is going to be a good example once Lincoln really gets it humming in a couple of years. Is he the 5th best recruiting class every year? And like when he plays Georgia or Alabama, again, Alabama could fall off because he might leave. Let's say Brian Kelly or Jimbo turns their program into that. Is there still a gap because that top 25 kid is so much better than the 80th kid? But even getting the 80th kid is a big deal for recruiting. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the 20th kid's a lot better than the 80th kid.
That's why Kayvon was such a big deal when Oregon got him, because he was a guy that Alabama or Georgia would have taken.
But I think where I disagree is that simply by opening the playoff up to 12 teams, you create more teams, more programs that can say in recruiting, we have a chance. I think there's the chance that it creates a little more. NIL is already going to distribute talent a little bit further around, because now I can just pay a guy who would otherwise go to Alabama more money to come to A&M or whatever. And I think when you have more teams for the category of players that really care about trying to win a national championship, there was only a handful of programs every year that could tell them, if you come here, you have a chance. I think the playoff kind of did that, where it made it so that like Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, definitely, Ohio State, Like players knew there's only a couple of programs that can walk into my living room and truly tell me I can go to the playoffs every year.
But isn't that the beef with NIL? Is that players don't care about that as much if you can offer me way more money? It's why Texas A&M, who wins
that's part of
it.
But to me, that's one example of something that distributes the talent away from Alabama and Georgia a little bit. And then I think the playoff is another thing that distributes the talent a little bit away from those programs potentially, because that's one more argument I could make is before Alabama could just pay more, Georgia could just pay more. And this was the only place you were coming to win a championship. Now you can go to maybe you don't win it. You can go to the playoff from a lot of places, especially if you have a chance for conference champions to go. And NIL is also like wherever Dion is, right? I don't know if you saw his kid was like 22 or 26, 5 touchdowns this weekend in a win over God only knows who.
Started 17-17.
Started 17-17, almost broke David Carr's Texans record. Or did Derek Carr break David Carr's record? Most completions to start a game?
Didn't Aaron Rodgers hold that record?
Maybe Aaron held the record. I don't know. I thought David had anyway, maybe David almost got Aaron's, whatever it was. So
at Fresno State or at Houston?
No, Texans.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So I do think in that way it's good for the sport. And then I think as bad as Oregon and Georgia was, like just for a second, that game would not, I don't know what the rating was in the second half. It wasn't good. 27-3, whatever the hell the score was. But what I love about a game is like you turn it on, stadium, teams run out, logos, fans, and you're going to get that every game for the 4 playoff teams that we've had. So many of those games have been awesome hype, bad games. We've had a lot of bad games in the 14 playoff. So whether or not you get a lot more bad games in the 12-team playoff, of course you will. You're right.
Isn't the average margin of victory in the first round in the playoffs pretty high?
It's huge. It's huge. But you're still going to get eyeball. The game's going to kick off, and you're going to have huge ratings, and it's going to create more money. I think the amount of money, they're leaving hundreds of millions of dollars on the table by not having a playoff. So I do think it's better for the sport overall, A, from a recruiting standpoint that I mentioned, B, more fan bases engaged, more fan bases watching. I think it just makes the sport a little more national. I think it's good in that way.
I don't disagree with anything you said in terms of the more money, the more eyeballs, more chances. I just don't think it solves the fundamental problem of like the same powerhouses. You could argue before the playoffs in the BCS era, before NIL money, back when only the same powerhouses for the most part dominate decades, right? Now the powerhouse might change, like Nebraska was on top of Notre Dame, and then it kind of shifted more to USC and Texas. But it's 2 or 3 teams dominate college football consistently. And I think I
think it does increase the chance that just they have to play more games now to win a championship, right? It increases somebody gets hurt.
But my main pushback is on just the college football playoff actually being sweet. Again, I'm going to watch the game. I'm all for it. March Madness gets a lot of hype, right? I think the main difference in March Madness is there are consistent major upsets consistently. And I just think that is not going to happen in football. And you could say, well, now Alabama has to play 3 games instead of 2. Of course, it's football, but I don't know. We have now 8 years of data of the top teams. Like one of the biggest upset was Ohio State against Alabama. But actually, how did that game age? Well, Urban Meyer was the coach of Ohio State. Their star players were Zeke, Joey Bosa, fucking Michael Thomas. It turns out, like, actually, that team was littered. It was Alabama. We just didn't quite know how good those guys were yet, and that is the biggest upset so far.
Yeah.
And I think that game aged actually wasn't that crazy of an upset, right? Like,
just think about how many times has Alabama been upset, period, in the regular season. Forget about in the playoffs.
Yeah, it doesn't
How many times does Georgia get upset, period? Right.
But that's my thing with the NFL, which I think makes their playoffs so awesome, is like definitely once you get to the second round, anyone can win. And you could argue, depending on the matchup, like in the first round, it could happen. That's just, it doesn't feel
There's usually only a team or 2 that you don't think can win week 1 of the NFL playoffs, wild card weekend, right?
Yeah, and maybe you're right as time goes and things neutralize a little bit.
Nick Saban isn't going to be coaching forever either. That's the other thing, right?
It is.
You think.
But I do think it shifted. Like, so let's say he leaves and Alabama just comes back to earth a little bit. Brian Kelly or Jimbo could easily take that mantle of just being a consistent power.
Well,
right?
Clearly Georgia's ready to take the number 1 spot.
I'd say Georgia is now Alabama 2.0. Like they're just Alabama's equal.
There's just 2 teams now that run college football, those 2.
Like you agree they're dramatically, but like if Ohio State's the 3rd best team, like they're in a different category.
It would be a major upset if Alabama and Georgia aren't playing in the title game this year.
Well, I think the question with Ohio State is like, is Ryan Day any good? And when I say any good, obviously he's good. I just mean at that level. Like one thing Kirby's established, like I'm a big boy, and I plan on being a multiple-time national champion. I think Lincoln Riley, like, we saw him take Stoops to another level. Like, Ryan Day has gone back. That's what I just wonder. Now, you could argue they got a big win, but they were playing a first-time head coach. They barely covered. I mean, they were losing. I only watched bits and pieces because it was far away in the bar I was in. They were losing at one point.
Notre Dame is a consistent playoff team, right? Now they get blown out in the playoff, but historically, they're a pretty good program.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So is that the level Ohio State? Like, Urban had them as like, we're competing for natties.
Right.
Like, it doesn't quite feel like Ohio State took again, incremental step back, which is still better. Every 99% of teams in the country would sign up for that.